My name is Yoon from University of Texas, Arlington. Again, thank you so much for inviting me. Dr. Kim and I actually met this morning for the first time because why she knew about me, because I wrote an article and Dr. Kim had the chance to read that, and actually today the presentation is about that article. That is for improving early childhood science learning. I think many of you know about that. To develop the rich brain, you need to work on early. So that way, the early impact gonna grow the early childhood brain development. So many people work on early childhood education, right? Especially for learning science is very important for their future society and their future life. But in school, teachers are having trouble and hard time in teaching science because they thought teaching science is to have them memorize a lot of complicated science and concepts. So people, not only the teachers, but also parents and other administrators, they're having some kind of looking for solutions. As one of the science educators, I want you to know about Do Science. Enhancing students' acquisition of science concepts and facts can be improved by knowing about doing science. So I want to let you know about that concept. The doing science, have you heard about that? Maybe many of you already know about the definition of science, but do science is more emphasizing process. There are lots of science concepts you already know about, like knowledge about around you, knowledge about the world, exploring. Do science is emphasizing the process for producing knowledge. So it's more process focused. It's not about the product of science. Many people try to memorize the product of science, like facts, theories, concepts, something like that, or appliances. But when you're more focused on process, like when you think about you have first product of science, that is, for example, a concept, and then from the concept you have questions and why it happens, it doesn't match with this. Then the students start a process to explore, and then they have some kind of data, and then the data cannot match with the previous hypothesis, then they're gonna go back and explore again, and then they go to the next concept. So when you think about the final product of science, it will be more content and something like that. But when you focus on the process, like from the first concept to go to the next concept, there is a full process. So when you focus on the process, then your students don't have to have overwhelming memorizing all the science concepts. So do science is more need to be emphasized in your science classroom and also at home, also in our society. So for doing science, you need to ask questions, observing, classifying, communicating, measuring, predicting, inferring, experimenting, constructing model, as opposed to memorizing facts and concepts and theories. I put this picture. This picture is my dog named Pluto. I always have him to backyard. Whenever I have him go to the backyard, he always doing like this. Try to smell and then try to think, which one is, who belong to this pea? Something like this. So he tried to find out who, and then if it's not belong to his, then he do something. So all this process actually it's part of doing science. I didn't teach how to do science to him. He just has his natural talent. So, something like that. When you have your children, they're actually born to be scientists. So to encourage their own natural talent, you need to have a good environment. You need to have focus on more process. So for doing science, there are lots of strategies you might have or other scientists. But I just picked three things here. Developmentally appropriate practice, DAP. The second one is 5E instructional model, and third one is questioning. So when you have these things appropriately in your teaching science or in your robots or in your application, then it will encourage your children to learn science better. The first, developmentally appropriate practice. Many of you, when you try to teach something to early child, then you may think about, oh, if it is appropriate to their age, so that's the first thing you need to think. So that's correct way to guide your children. But if you want to see if that is appropriate, you need to think about the children can have chance to work on it. So the children as the learner driver, main driver, so he can or she can work on manipulating and creating artifacts on their own. Also, you need to have more chance to have them initiate and lead their activities. And also, children need to have multisensory science experiences. And also, children as a social and cultural being provide socially and culturally relevant practice and support meaningful connections between their playing, learning, and living. So when you have these things appropriately, then you can say, yeah, this is good for appropriate to their age level. Once you have their appropriate developmentally and then also socially and cognitively, you have that practice, then when you provide that program, you need to follow these 5 E's. These 5 E's based on learning cycle. Like long time ago, many scientists, educators, they think about how the people develop knowledge in their brain. So they have a lot of models, and then in science education, we emphasizing this 5E learning cycle. So at the beginning, the children need to have something to get involved. So in this period, students or children, they have chance to think about, I heard about it, or why it happens. So they start to have questions in this period. Dr. Han talked about like they need to have some kind of pre-concept. That way they understand the abstract correctly, right? So something like this. So at the beginning, you need to check if your children has some experiences or if they have some misconception in their brain. So by bringing the questions to encourage the students to bring their pre-knowledge or encourage them to have questions why it happens. So that's the engagement. And then after the engagement, students, the children have some questions and then they start to look for it. So that's the explorations. For example, when you bring some weird picture, and have you heard about, have you seen this picture before? You bring some questions at the beginning and then students start, oh, I never saw, or oh, where it happened. So they start to explore to find out the question. So that's the exploration. And then once they explored, then they get together and then organize their learning. That's the explanation. And then once the explanation done, then the teacher or some program need to have additional chance to extend their learning. So that's the elaboration. So when you have these four phases, but then each phases need to be evaluated. So that way the children can go to next step. So evaluation need to be done for each phases. So that's the 5E learning cycle. When you have these steps in your program or robots or in your learning, in your life, then children can learn science easily. The last thing I want to mention to make your children learn science better is questioning. Once you have an appropriate program and once you have this 5-8 learning cycle steps, then you need to add questions to each phases. That way, children can be the main person to learn. When you ask, then look for the answer so that children can accumulate knowledge in their brain. When you have questions, there's two things you need to keep in mind. The Bloom's taxonomy. Many of you already know about Bloom's taxonomy. When you have Bloom's taxonomy, you can ask questions appropriate to their developmental level and thinking level, actually. So I brought this pyramid. Your students, your children may have these steps. Some of your children only have a thinking level in knowledge, but then some of them may have a little higher, like comprehension level. And then the top is gonna be evaluation. So when you wanna make the questions, you can just say, what is this? So that is recall your students' pre-knowledge. So when you have some robotics or when you have some cooperation activities with your children, you can always need to prepare in advance these questions. Or you can have your children make these questions by themselves. But most important thing is you need to check with your students and then appropriate to their developmental level, you need to prepare it. When you prepare the questions, one more thing you need to keep in mind is Vygotsky's Journal of Proximal Development. Journal of Proximal Development is by your helping, by someone else's scaffolding, your students can go a little one more step. When you have your children have knowledge level, then you need to have one more questions for upper level. So when you have these two level questions, then even if your children are in knowledge level, with your scaffolding of questioning, your children can go a little bit upper level. So that is Journal of Proximal Development. So keep in mind these three things, then you can have children learn science better. So my last question is, how can we support the children doing science as they play, interact with the robots? So think about when you develop this robot, these three things. Thank you.